was named Joan Rabel. Could be Rebel, could be Rabel, for my luck. Now, Joan was previously a freelance photographer who spent time taking writing classes at the University of Honolulu in the late 1940s. So, what was she doing in a beauty parlor? I don't know. They never specify. But she was a divorcee from Philadelphia and was just looking for work in the city, I guess. But regardless, she ended up being one of the few that was hired, and she developed a very close working relationship to Peter and Betty, and particularly became very close with Betty. After working there for however long, it doesn't actually specify timelines quite well, Betty and Peter had had a few hiccups in their relationship. Things were not going so well. So Betty, who was very close with Joan, had ended up actually leaving her home with Peter. She even took the children, and they had all lived with Joan. Now, it isn't clear what her relationship with Joan was, but it's kind of clear. The media at the time said that Betty and Joan had an abnormal relationship, so I'm thinking they were a little bit of lovers. Most people believe so, at least. So Betty had left Peter. They were going through a tough time. She had leaned on Joan quite a bit, and it doesn't actually say how long she lived with Joan, but it's implied that quite a bit, and they had a very intense relationship. But Betty and Peter ended up trying to reconcile their relationship. Betty had went to speak with Peter, and he was very hopeful to reunite their relationship, as was she. They wanted to work on things. And Betty asked if she could move back into the home, and Peter said that he was more than happy to do so, but on one condition. Betty had to lose all connection, all ties with Joan. That is not unreasonable, especially if she was having some sort of affair. I also would be like, yeah, come on back, but they better never be back in your life. So Peter was just doing the best he could to protect himself and his relationship with Betty. So sure enough, Betty had cut her ties with Joan and had moved back into the home with Peter and the kids. Love found a way for them, I suppose. But Joan was left brokenhearted and alone. She had become infatuated with Betty, obsessed. She was clearly in love, and she was very much a scorn woman in a very intense way, which we will get to. Lonely Joan did not want to be alone. She had ended up meeting up with a woman named Goldine Pizer, who was a lab assistant at a children's hospital in Los Angeles. She was 42, was born in Rockford, Illinois, and was the daughter of German immigrants. By the late 1940s, she'd ended up taking up work as a secretary. On October 29th of 1944, she had married Hervert Crome, a pharmacist at the Naval Hospital. But sure enough, like the other women in this story, she would end up getting a divorce. Goldine had then strictly gotten into relationships with women going forward. So Goldine and Joan had met up and were very interested in one another. It was very quick, very much a whirlwind romance. And Goldine was very much in love with Joan. But it was clear to Goldine right from the get-go that Joan was still not over her previous relationship. Joan would talk about her ex, Betty, was true love, clearly. So, over the course of 3 months, Joan had manipulated and talked Goldine into planning and murdering Peter. Very intense. She gave Goldine money so that she could purchase a weapon and bullets, and Joan had even planned on borrowing one of her close friend's car to use as a getaway vehicle. So Joan gave her money, but Goldine was still the one that actively went in and purchased the weapon and that type of thing. And on Halloween night, their plan was to commence. So the night of the murder, Joan had borrowed her friend's car and left her vehicle in her driveway. Now, she did so that her neighbors, should they be questioned, be able to back Joan up that no, she was at home all night, her vehicle was there, she was inside, the lights were on. Joan had then went out and picked up costumes for herself and Goldine to wear, so they dressed up for the night so that they were unrecognizable. So they wore domino masks. This one she had mentioned that she had heard two voices that night, one masculine and one that sounded like a man trying to sound like a woman. Now, the police tried to dig into Peter's past a bit, and they pointed out that the shooting was actually very similar to a gang assassination. So they wanted to know, could that be a possibility? If so, why would he be targeted? But that also was thrown away. And aside from a misdemeanor charge of bookmaking in 1948, Peter was clean. But Betty had actually thought a bit further and stated that the only person that she could think disliked Peter but wouldn't necessarily want to hurt him would be Joan, a family friend. Now, Joan was then taken in for questioning, but there was nothing, no proof she had an alibi, and they did not seem to suspect her at all. So the police had nothing for a while, and Joan thought that she had executed the perfect plan, but little did she, nor the police know, that Goldine was now a fuming, scorned woman who had no loyalty to anyone now. So honestly, Joan should have seen this coming. Joan should not have done that right away. But if Joan was so willing to manipulate and convince another woman to do her bidding that was this extreme, I don't know why she wouldn't think that this person wouldn't be willing to go so extreme to screw her over after all of that. But anyway, so Goldine was left alone, feeling guilty, feeling the grief of being dumped, and she still had the murder weapon, because while burning their clothes Joan smiled throughout the entire trial, and people thought that she assumed it was some entire production for her. It was very weird. One of the hearings, Goldine had worn a leopard print dress with a long coat over her shoulders, while Joan wore a plain blouse and skirt. Just something I thought I'd mention, since I don't think leopard print is really courtwear, but maybe it is to some people, I don't know. So initially they were both charged with first-degree murder, but through a plea deal it was reduced to second-degree murder. The women were only sentenced to 5 years to life and were eventually released. I have no clue how much time they actually served. It is not written anywhere. But there are rumors around this entire story to this day. But it's really hard to find anything because newspapers didn't want to write a story about lesbians or homosexuals. They just wouldn't touch it. So it would be the trick-or-treat murders surrounding absurd and abnormal women for the papers that would write about it, at least. So Goldine was actually released from prison and worked in the Professional Women's Club until she passed away in 1999. Betty had sold the beauty salons right after Peter's death and appeared to remarry in 1966. She also passed away in 1999 at the age of 81 in Palm Desert, which made her 36 at the time of Peter's death. Joan was very mysterious with everything. Her whole life she kind of had been. They believe that she was from Philadelphia, but there was some questioning over this since it appeared that she'd actually immigrated into the United States from Lithuania. But after she had served her time in prison, she was released and no one has heard of her. She basically disappeared without a trace, which isn't surprising. So, had you guys heard this story before? If so, what do you think? If you